So you're scrolling through the internet, through the latest fitness trends, and the same thing keeps coming across your gaze: red light therapy. And so you're doing more research on Google and you're seeing all types of different things. Red light therapy wraps to wrap around your arms and legs after a workout. Red light therapy helmets for the follicles to stimulate hair growth. And you dig a little deeper and you find all different types of people claiming different things about red light therapy. So you ask yourself, but are any of these claims true? And what is the science behind that? Well, let's talk about that on today's episode of The Science Behind That.
Welcome to The Science Behind That with Atticus Hamilton.
Hello, all you scientists, and welcome on back to The Science Behind That podcast. I am your host, Atticus Hamilton, and look, I know, it's been another month, maybe even 2 months, I think, since I uploaded. Well, look, I think probably a lot of you have given up on this podcast because of that, unfortunately, but I understand. But one thing I can say is I have moved. So I moved from Colorado to Connecticut. So literally across the entire country, which is crazy to me that it's finally over. But it's finally over. I moved. And so, now I really am going to do my best to stick to 2 episodes a week, at least for the next year. And I know some of you are like, yeah, but you've said that 5 times, which is true. I have said that 5 times. But this time I actually mean it because, I'm in a new setup now. I got all my stuff here, and I think that it will be pretty straightforward for me to be able to do 2 episodes a week, Monday and Friday. So if you guys out there, want to give me one more chance, I'd appreciate it. If not, that's fine. But that aside, let's jump into today's episode. So welcome to all of you veteran listeners. Welcome to all you new listeners. Before we get started, make sure and go grab yourself a nice steaming hot cup of coffee. Add a little bit of maple syrup to it. And, I don't have coffee in front of me. I have I don't know if you've seen them, these coffee alternatives. I'm trying to cut down on caffeine, so I figured I'd give it a try. It's okay, but nothing beats coffee. So do me a favor and go grab yourself a cup of coffee. All right, so jumping into today's episode, we have a couple things to cover. And, I was actually pretty surprised when I was recording this episode because the data I found actually seemed to be pretty promising for a couple of these different alleged uses, I guess, of red light therapy. So we are going to get into that and talk about that here. The first one is dementia. Sorry, I had to grab my notes, and if you hear any noise in the background, I'm sorry. My dishwasher is very loud. But the first one is dementia. So with dementia, I went to the best place to get a nice compilation of, the alleged uses of something, which is WebMD. Don't use WebMD for actual data, but if you're looking to find out what, all the claims people make about something, it's a great source for that. So the first thing that people claim that red light therapy is great for is dementia. And this was kind of interesting. So before we get in too deep, the actual clinical term, I guess, for red light therapy is called low-level light therapy, and you may also see it as low-level light laser treatment. they're pretty much the same thing, basically red light therapy. Now, it's called red light therapy because red light therapy is a very low on the light spectrum, and it's almost ultraviolet. And so that's why it's called low level light therapy, because like blue light is high level just based on its wavelength, and then red light is low level also based on its wavelength and the energy carried by it. So when I was doing my research for dementia, it seemed like most of the papers out there were talking about laser light treatment, or LLLT, low-level light therapy, right? It was mostly talking about low-level light therapy or red light therapy for the treatment of dementia in the sense of improving sleep cycles for patients. So with dementia and Alzheimer's, a lot of times with a lot of patients, one of the biggest symptoms we see is issues with sleeping. And so sometimes patients with dementia will just wake up in the middle of the night and think it's day, and you have a lot of other associated problems with it. And so the papers I found were looking at the use of low-level light therapy to essentially simulate night and day cycles in these patients. And so in most of the studies, what they did was they put a device on the patient so that the actual irises, or sorry, not the irises, the retinas of their eyes would actually receive that light. And they had different modes for morning, afternoon, evening, and night. And what the study found was that those, when performed in that sense, red light therapy did have a beneficial effect on dementia because and Alzheimer's, because it significantly improved the sleep of patients with those conditions. And so to me, that's kind of intriguing, because that begs the question then, well, you know, if it improves the sleep in patients with dementia and Alzheimer's, would red light therapy do the same thing in healthy patients? And I guess I don't really know. I couldn't find any papers specifically talking about that. If you guys know of any, or if you have any suggestions or comments for the show, send me an email at thesciencebt@gmail.com, and maybe we can turn those suggestions into an episode. But I think that that's a nice area of research to go forwards in the future. And, you know, when I was doing the research, a lot of these I found to basically yield to the same conclusions. Well, the studies we found showed that there is a benefit, but more research needs to be done. So then overall, the conclusions for dementia and Alzheimer's: is red light therapy effective? Possibly, you know. Now, why is it effective? It seems like it's effective because when done correctly, it can improve the sleep of Alzheimer's patients and dementia patients. So moving on here, the next one in the list was interesting, actually, was dental pain. So people said that red light therapy is helpful in dental pain. So, of course, I went to the literature, and believe it or not, there are a lot of research papers on this very topic, and a couple meta-reviews. I always like meta-reviews over the individual research papers, because meta-reviews, when done through a credible institution, they're really nice because they essentially summarize the results of a ton of different papers and studies into a nice, easily digestible packet. So this meta-review was titled "Developments in Low Light Level Therapy for Dentistry," published in the Journal of Dental Materials, May 2014. So ultimately, so this was a meta review. They found 2,700 results when looking specifically for red light therapy and dentistry. 153, or it was reduced to 153. 41 were review papers or editorials, 65 clinical studies, 47 laboratory studies. And of all the publications, so not of the 2,700, of the 153, 130 reported a positive effect in terms of pain relief, fast healing, and or other improvements in symptoms. And 23 reported inconclusive or negative outcomes. So, basically we have 130 positives and 23 negatives, So, that's a pretty good result, I think. That's a 17% negative rate, or an 83% success rate, I guess. So at least out of those 153 studies. So that's pretty good. It appears from this paper that their data suggests that red light therapy direct application is very helpful when relieving pain during oral surgeries. And so using that, I dug a little deeper and looked to see if there is any papers that look specifically at pain relief. And I did find one paper titled, "Does the use of low-level light therapy reduce pain, edema, and neurosensory disorders following orthognathic, I can never say that word, surgery?" And this was, again, another meta-review. So real quick, what is orthognathic surgery? Orthognathic surgery is a type of surgery that aims to correct issues with the jaw. So ortho, mouth, and then gnathic, if I remember correctly, bone, jaw. So it's specifically to correct issues with the jaw. So in this particular meta-review, they were looking at the use of LLLT in improving pain, specifically in the inferior alveolar nerve, which is in the jaw after orthognathic surgery. And so ultimately, what they discovered was that of the 3 studies evaluating the outcome of controlling pain, all were positive. Of the studies that evaluated edema, 2 were positive. And of the 11 studies that evaluated the neurosensory disorders of the inferior alveolar nerve, all of them observed a positive effect. And so ultimately, they're saying here that of all the search parameters in their meta review, all of the research papers that they found that either investigated pain, investigated edema, or investigated other sensory disorders of the nerve post-operatively, pretty much all of them were positive. Except they do add here that there needs to be more research conducted, but that LLLT is minimally invasive, as we all know if we've had any exposure to it, and so because of that, it's the possibility for use should be further investigated. So far it seems like the claims made about helping with dementia and Alzheimer's may be accurate, as it seems like red light therapy improves sleep in patients with dementia and Alzheimer's. And we've also seen that when it comes to pain, specifically dental pain, that the data is also looking promising for the use of red light therapy, as in a variety of medical reviews, meta-analyses. The results again, seem to be promising. So that's 2 for 2. So next, of course, is an investigation into the use of red light therapy for hair loss. And I'm sure all of you or most of you out there who have heard of this have probably heard of it used in this capacity. Sorry, I needed another sip of my fake coffee thing. So anyway, this paper, again, was a meta-analysis, and it was kind of interesting because while they did say a handful of studies have determined that the use of LLLT does stimulate the hair follicles and may be helpful in hair growth, there are also a lot of studies that are inconclusive, overall rendering the results as mixed. And they've also said that the studies that have been done suffer from power, confounding, and analytical issues, which resulted in a high risk of bias in LLLT studies. And additionally, there's a dearth of well-conducted randomized clinical controlled trials, which therefore renders the efficacy of LLLT devices unclear. And so this was an interesting paper because they were specifically looking at devices for LLLT that you can buy on like Amazon. So I don't know about you guys, but I've seen like the little helmets, that have all the little red light bulbs in it, and people claim, oh, put it on your hair and watch the regrowth happen. And, to me, that's always seemed kind of silly because, at least in a lot of instances, hair loss is governed by genetics and therefore the resulting endocrinology and chemistry of that individual, which is what causes the hair loss. So, in men, a lot of times we see that men with higher levels of DHT results in an overall progressive thinning of the hair follicle, which then results in it falling out and causing hair loss. And that can either be due to, anabolic steroid use. It could be due to alopecia. It could be due to a variety of different things. And so it was always, I don't know, it always seemed a little too good to believe to me, saying that, these little light helmets help with hair loss. And it seems like, according to this paper, when those red light therapy hair helmets are evaluated, they're evaluated based on safety and not efficacy. So, something can be 100% safe and do nothing. And so I think that that's what they're trying to say here, which is due to the fact that there's very little clinical trials out there, more data needs to be conducted. So I did continue looking, and I found another article called Low-Level Laser Therapy in Hair Regrowth, an Evidence-Based Review. And so here they reviewed evidence of the LLLT effects with a meta-review approach, basically focusing specifically on randomized controlled studies. They used a lot of different databases for this, and from their research, they found 21 relevant studies. 2 were in vitro, 7 were animal studies, and 12 were clinical trials. Among these clinical studies, only 5 were randomized controlled trials, which evaluated LLLT effect on male and female pattern hair loss. And so ultimately, only 1 of the 5 studies performed intention to treat analysis. And what that means is 1 of their 5 randomized clinical trials was conducted with the goal to try and find a therapy, or at least to try and determine if red light therapy is a possible treatment for hair loss. And they found that ultimately those papers concluded that they did result in some sort of benefit. And so they concluded, based on this meta-analysis, all available evidence about LLT and alopecia, we found that the FDA-cleared devices are safe and effective in patients with male pattern hair loss and female pattern hair loss who did not respond to or were not tolerant to standard treatment methods. And then they continue to say more studies need to be done. And so this was kind of interesting to me, because this meta-review seems to be contradictory to the other one we looked at not too long ago. And so I think then when it comes to red light therapy and the use of hair loss, more data needs to be done. Needs to be gathered. More research needs to be done, because at least in my mind, the evidence there is still very inconclusive. And that is in contrary to the last topic we're looking at, which is the use of low-level laser light therapy on muscle tissue in helping with performance, reducing fatigue, and repair. And this was interesting. So this was a German article. Luckily, it was translated into English for me, because I don't speak German. I speak Swedish. And this was published 2012 in the Journal of Photonics and Lasers in Medicine. And I guess this is a German research journal. So ultimately, this was a pretty long paper, and it got really heavy into biochemistry, because they wanted to see if, in a very brief sense, if red light therapy reduced muscle soreness and therefore increased performance. And they also wanted to see if there was any marketable increase in muscular repair. And what they determined was that through a variety of photochemical processes, which I will spare you from because it is pretty in-depth, actually, which, I mean, is impressive. But ultimately what they found is mitochondria are the primary photoreceptors or photoacceptors of human cells. And so what they determined was that because skeletal muscle particularly has a very high level or high concentration of mitochondria, red light therapy, or LLT, seems to actually activate the photoaccepting aspect of mitochondria and stimulate a variety of different things. So some of the things that they found that were stimulated was producing free radical scavengers. So during exercise, you have two main free radicals that are produced. And what a free radical is, we've talked about this before on this podcast, but a free radical is basically a compound that does not have a complete electron octet, if you will. And so because of it, it very aggressively tries to steal electrons from other things. And that's what causes oxidation to either genomes or your muscle tissue, whatnot. And so it's for a very long time been demonstrated that reducing oxidation reduces aging and reduces damage and stress. And so one of the things this study found was that red light therapy for muscular recovery aids in enzyme modulation within the mitochondria to produce more free radical scavengers to reduce the overall levels of free radicals, thereby reducing inflammation and allowing, the satellite cells of the muscles to do their job. And if you don't know, satellite cells are the cells responsible primarily for muscular repair. And along with that, they also found that red light therapy seemed to activate the mitochondria in ways that further enhance the ability of satellite cells to repair muscular tissue. And ultimately, that's what they found. So at the end of the day, it was determined that within the muscles, what they set out to determine seemed to be accurate. That red light therapy had an effect on performance, reducing inflammation and enhancing the ability of the muscle to actually repair itself. And so, I mean, to me, this was a very interesting paper. And I don't know, I would say that obviously more research should be conducted, but I think that with this, much like with the first two, the data seems to be in the favor of red light therapy for this, and that there may actually be a therapeutic purpose or a therapeutic application to red light therapy in helping with muscular recovery. So ultimately, out of all the things we talked about, dental pain, Alzheimer's and dementia, hair loss, and muscular soreness, it seems like all of them, except for hair loss, came through really strongly for red light therapy. Hair loss definitely seemed to be more of a mixed bag and really in need of more conclusive clinical trials to be done. So overall, I was very surprised by the results of this. I went into this thinking that because red light is perceived by the body as heat, I figured that, if there were any observed effects, especially for the muscular recovery, that it would be due to the actual thermal side of everything, kind of like hot and cold therapy. But it seems like there is evidence that suggests that it's the actual photons themselves that are interacting with the mitochondria and modulating both enzymatic responses to stressors in the environment and, of course, enhancing the ability of satellite cells to do their job. So that concludes today's episode of the Science Behind That podcast. Honestly, I'm very surprised. I thought that, I don't know, I guess I had my mind made up about this topic before I even recorded it. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited to finally be back and posting stuff, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Remember, as always, I will see you on Friday. Have a great week, and remember, stand up and question everything.